eine halbe Minute und sind dann. Ja, meine sehr
Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, I think it's 4 o'clock now and we can get started. This panel was planned lots of weeks ago, and it used to have a different topic, although we had the same participants. And originally we were going to talk about democracy in Israel, which is under threat. But after the pogrom, after the massacre by Hamas, this is not the right time to do so, and that's why our topic today is Israel and Palestine, how to get out of this irreconcilability. And Alina Jabarin is one participant. She's a German and Palestinian journalist. And Meron Mendel, who is a German-Israeli publisher and director of the educational institute Anne Frank. There is a big echo on my ears. Maybe my ears are wrong. So ways out of irreconcilability, if you are looking for it, then you have to start talking first. And that's why the goal on this panel is to talk to each other, to listen to each other, and to reflect together. And these 3 points, speaking, listening, reflecting, will be the common thread or the guideline of the discussion on the panel. Under normal circumstances, it is journalistically unacceptable to ask the participants about how they feel, but these are not normal conditions, and that's why I think it is absolutely necessary to ask you how you are, Mr. Mendel. Can you hear me? As you can imagine, I don't feel very good, although it's always important for me to stress and to reassure myself it's not about me. No matter how you are linked to Palestine or Israel, all of us who are here, we are extremely privileged. And so we are doing fine, at least in terms of our physical conditions. However, this is accompanied by a feeling of helplessness. So when I heard and understood or thought to understand what happened on the 7th and 8th of October in Israel, my first instinct was to book a flight to Israel. And I did actually book one in 2 weeks' time. And now there are 2 thoughts in my mind. On the one hand, I think I have to be there. That's the only way I can act. People, my family, my childhood friends, everyone is now under existential threat. Some of them had to bury their family members, their loved ones, and I can't just stay here 3,000 kilometers away and stay on the sidelines, basically. I was connected to 3 funerals via Zoom, which is an unacceptable, unbearable feeling to just be behind a screen and follow a funeral from there. And on the other hand, the feeling is I'm completely useless over there. Why should I go there? I can talk to people, I can embrace them when I go there, take them in my arms, but what happened has happened, and it's continuing to happen, and we can't stop it. There is something which is an ongoing process, a cruel ongoing process, and we as people, as humans, are powerless. And if you really ask me about my feeling, that's really this powerlessness and this complete emptiness, which is my feeling. Jabarin. Well, I can share a lot of what Meron says. I had also the reflex of going there directly, of flying there directly, because my feeling also was that I'm completely out of place here in Germany. And I have never cried as much as in the last few days. And it's not about us, but many people feel the same. Let me talk about myself. I've never seen so many people cry in my family, at work, in the streets, at cultural events. So you look into each other's eyes, and if you feel the same, you start weeping, you start crying. Of course, there are lots of people in Germany who couldn't care less. I do realize that. But the circles I'm living in, or moving in, there is no one who is not completely shattered. And everything started with this shock after this terror attack, whose scale I understood only a few days after it happened. At the beginning, you didn't really understand what was happening. I was thinking initially, is it a kind of dream or a kind of joke? I'm gonna wake up very soon from this dream. But before you were able to process this and understand this, it continued immediately. The events continued immediately, and after 12 days, I think it's now, my heart is broken. I'm thinking of those people who lost their loved ones on the 7th of October, and I also feel with the people who have hostages in their families and do not know whether they'll meet these people again. I'm also worried about my family, who all of them are living on Israeli territory. I have a very big family there. Half of it is in Haifa, and if there are bombs coming from Lebanon, they have to run into the staircase, and the other half of the family is in Jaffa, and they will get hit by rockets coming from Gaza, but they also feel the reverberations of Israeli air attacks on Gaza. So people have a lot of gallows humor, because I spoke on the phone with my 16-year-old cousin in Jaffa, and there was a rocket which hit direct next to his entry of the school, and he said, "That's cool. Our classes are now via Zoom only, so I can stay at home." So it's a very phony state. I've been working in the West Bank for 3 years. My best friends are there. My best friend Abil in Ramallah writes to me after the attack that I can't go to my family in Jericho because the military has closed off all the cities from each other. And if a war breaks out, I want to be with my family. At the same time, there are these settlers mobs who feel entitled to do some kind of self-justice, some vendetta themselves, which is happening. And Palestinians have been killed by settlers in recent days in the presence of the Israeli army. And so I'm really paralyzed by what is going on in Gaza. I don't know what to say. It seems to be a legitimate reaction to the terror attack in some people's minds. 2.5 million people who are closed in, who cannot escape. They can be bombarded, and their water supplies and food supplies can be shut off before that. That's really the point where I'm standing at the moment. And there's this helplessness and the worry about your family and friends, about your companions. Well, this is what you feel. And here we have privilege. We can talk with each other, which is not natural. The situation at the book fair also reflects the fact that the feeling is very heated. The tensions are very high, are running very high. And it wasn't easy for you, Ms. Jabarin, to decide to come here against all odds. Mr. Mendel, you are a constant feature at the book fair in many fora. But under which conditions is it possible at the moment to talk to each other? What are the conditions for this talk, this conversation to happen here and also outside this panel? To me, the conditions are not the conditions of the 7th of October. For my Palestinian friends I'm talking to, these friendships arose not just 10 days ago, 12 days ago. I would say, for me, the right of the Palestinian people to their own state is an inalienable right, which is also covered by international law. That is my conviction, and I expect that the person I'm talking to says the same, that Jews have their state and have their territory, their state in this territory. This should be beyond doubt. It should be out of the question. Of course they do. And frequently there is a very funny dialogue emerging when I say I'm Israeli, and often I'm corrected, and they said, "You're coming from Palestine." No, I say I'm coming from Israel. I'd expect you to use the word Israel and not Palestine. If you don't, then that's the end of our conversation, because that's what my point. No dialogue can happen without accepting the other party's existence, a right to existence. So I can't have a dialogue with you now, but I think you should not exist. It's very difficult to talk to each other then. But what's happened since the 7th of October shows that in society we have a deep dehumanization of Jews in Israel. This has really progressed a lot. So if I look at the social media, for example, sometimes these tweets are shared 10,000 times, where pictures of people from the peaceful musical rave, they run for their lives and they are slaughtered to death. And the headline is, here you have the settlers running away. The settlers, they are not the settlers Janela has mentioned, those who have illegal settlements in the West Bank. We're talking about people in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Beril, other places. And they were slaughtered because they lived in this part of the territory in the Middle East. And of course they were writing, what do you expect if you colonize a piece of the land which doesn't belong to you? Then that's a logical consequence. As someone from Medico International also said, I'm completely objective about it. I think it's a logical consequence. That's actually an employee of Medico International, of a human rights organization. So that is for me the condition for any conversation, and that's the line I've been drawing ever since I was young. We can argue about anything, but we have to agree on one point. Your existence is inalienable, and I also expect that you will respect my existence. Ms. Shabarin, do you know this phenomenon described by Mr. Mendel, that from the Palestinian side, the word Israel isn't actually used? And what are the preconditions for you for a conversation to happen? Yes, I do know that phenomenon, and I also see that since the 7th of October, there are many not nice things which are coming to the surface from all kinds of quarters. Do you mean hatred? Yes, lots of hatred. That's lots of dehumanization, lots of racism and anti-Semitism. Anything you don't want is something which we see emerging left, right, and center. And also, I've seen videos, Miran, as you're describing. But I care very much about my social media feeds, and I'm very selective there. But I've also seen ZDF Frontal articles about Gaza, and then there were entries there. Yes, I'm picking up my popcorn. Gaza is becoming a parking space. So lots of inhumane things are coming to the surface, which is difficult to stomach. But unlike Meron, in my personal case, I'm talking to just anyone or just about anyone. I've been sitting opposite to people who told me you can't be a Palestinian because Palestine doesn't exist, or you are Israeli because you have an Israeli passport. But that's my personal way of dealing with things. I'm not sure why, but from birth, I have this deep conviction that people are people and that they become what they become because of the experience they're making and the way they are socialized. And maybe it is possible to have a conversation with them and make a difference. But I also noticed that the pain threshold or tolerance threshold is going down. On a day like today, I don't feel like having these debates and I withdraw from those debates. But if I have more energy and more strength, then there is barely anyone I would not sit down with and talk about this with. In different contexts, what has come up there in different contexts, and I think you also said so, Mr. Mendel, at some point, that your impression is that there is a lack of respect for the victims of terror, and also respect for the hostages which are still in prison and or held hostage, and you don't know whether they will come out or be liberated at any point in the future. What would you wish for a respectful? What should be a respectful way of dealing with the situation, dealing with these people? Well, the first one who likes to have a political discussion and argue about politics and also speak up about my own opinions. And this is something which links us together. I'm, of course, willing to accept other people's points of view. But if you look back to recent history, there are moments in the general public where we as a collective, everyone individually and we as a collective, have to stop to think and become very, very quiet. I can remember 1982, I was very young at the time, but I will not forget the massacres of the two refugee camps, Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon by Christian Maronites with the agreement of the Israeli army. And some of you will be surprised here, but I can remember the situation in my kibbutz. This was a situation of a state of shock. In my family, the words Sabra and Shatila is not something which you just mention casually. It is nearly a synonym with Auschwitz. I know this is very difficult, but that's the shock we were in. We wanted to be different, but look at how deep we have dropped. That the fact that our army is looking on, doing nothing, when women and children, innocent men, are slaughtered in a refugee camp close to Beirut. We don't need a contextualization for that or relativization. That was self-standing. The same as when we talk about Srebrenica or Bucha in Ukraine. This is something where we as a society reassure each other that we are people, we are human. Why is it important? Because at this point we also understand and recognize that we are able to do things, that the fact that we as human beings are able to look each other in the eye and look over the 4-year-old and kill this 4-year-old child. Maybe these people who are doing it are people who have got kids themselves. And the fact that we are able to do that, that even I have this potential to do that, there must be some layer. I'm also human, and this potential is maybe even in myself. I'm actually potentially able to do that. And this is so off-putting, this so disconcerting for me, that my feeling is that I have to be very quiet and I have to think about it. I have to stop and think. And so this is my feeling, that this scale of the massacre in Bucha by the Russian army, when that became known, this moment what I was talking about in the German society, I think the German society has understood this moment.
And this moment, and indeed this moment in German society, this is something I've been waiting since October 7th for this moment in German society, and I'm waiting in vain. It does not mean that many people get in touch for their condolences, messages that were very emotional, people who called me on the phone. This is not what I mean. I mean something else. I talk about a consensus in the society as a whole, the reflex that I'm just experiencing. And we'll hear about it later. We heard it when we had the opening ceremony of Frankfurt Book Fair. The reflex is the same, yes, but do you see it in the context? Where does it come from? I don't need this. I am ready to discuss any topic. But, and this is the condition, if the term BRI, the term Kwa Azan, the term Nachalos, if these terms, these words have the same meaning in collective memory, in general public, just the word Srebrenica, the word Bucha, as soon as we have reached this moment, anything can be seen in the context. We can analyze whatever you want, but if it is not the case, I will have the feeling that we have two benchmarks. If Jews are killed, there is another moral standard, as if it were someone from Ukraine or Serbia or Croatia. And this is a moment, and this is my opinion. I won't move 1 millimeter as long as I do not see this change in society. Otherwise, I won't be able to see things in the context or to contextualize. I think it is so interesting that you see it this way. My experience was different. Well, I think, I've got to be honest, I have German contacts. I was not living in Germany when the war in Ukraine has started. I did not experience this moment in Germany. But my German colleagues, they cried. I've never ever seen German colleagues crying. I hardly ever saw an institution or people who are well known who did not say in public that they had to give a statement in public. I think up to the moment when this massacre has the symbolism and its name, as you mentioned, it takes some time, because I still think that nothing is clear finally. We don't know. There are more and more new aspects coming to light. You cannot tell within 1 week what it was really like. It takes time to settle. There will be many documentations. People will work on it in the next month, in the next weeks, on the events of October 7th. I see what you say. I see what you feel. And I think it is very interesting. You have the feeling that in this society, it it hasn't yet arrived in our society. Society should be traumatized, should be shocked. My experience was different. How about you, Basha, Mika? My experience was a different one. My experience was that people are shocked, are traumatized. They said that was a changing point. Let me be more precise. On the one hand, no doubt about it, there are many people, even if they are not directly concerned, felt very concerned and bad about it on the political level. And I think this hurts most. I see two groups, and I feel close to these two groups. And there is this coldness. First group, the migrant community. This is like a home for me. Many of my friends are migrants from the migrant community. And the minority, those who protested on the street and praised the events. It's the absolute minority, and it goes beyond imagination how a person can do that. And then there was a big part of society who said, well, you have to see it on relative terms, as I see in social media. We're talking about people, I thought until October 7th that we were on the same side. We are shocked at the events of Hanau and Halle, and then October 7th, suddenly things happen, and people say that's colonization. What do you expect? These are comments I hear. And the second group is the intellectual leftist cultural scene. There was one exception. That was the Gorky Theatre, who came up with a very reflected comment. And the theatre got a shit storm because of their comments, because they simply named the cruelty without a but. And apparently this leads to a debate. This leads to a situation where people suddenly receive threats, murder threats. My wife has written an article during that time. And she received a lot of threats to be raped or killed. You cannot even watch these messages. Up to a situation in the Western world. What is more than the moral reason, the moral rationale, like Harvard University? It's the highest moral instance. 31 student associations at Harvard University said 2 days after October 7th came up with a comment, and they talked about the responsibility for the events. They said responsibility is only with Israel. Fair enough. And the dean of the university, the president of this Harvard University, was not able, even 13 days later, to distance from this statement. If this happens in Harvard, well, then give up on what you ever thought were the basic values of our life together. So this is something that I see often. And I'm not asking for support for the Israeli government or Israeli politicians. I am asking for something very human and very simple. I am asking for something. Please recognize that what happened on October Please recognize that what happened on October 7th stands alone. The cruelty stands alone. And we do not say, let's see it on relative terms or in its context. Let me briefly mention something. As you said, you talked about the cultural community and scene. I must say, my impression was that many Germans felt helpless about the suffering they saw, about the shock after the Hamas attacks. They reacted by saying, by not maybe reflecting and stopping, but by cancelling, by saying this invitation is no longer valid, you're cancelled. And they cancelled people who are not responsible for the attacks. And the book fair, Frankfurt Book Fair, also no longer invited Anna Schibli, a Palestine author whose book is highly praised and acclaimed. Miss Schibli, she was supposed to receive an award, and no one was able to explain up to now why her books have to be read differently today, because there was this terror attack by Hamas. What type of book fair is this? I kindly ask the German audience, what type of fair is it? A very bad terrorist attack. No one can justify it. We have to say, if the reaction is that an author who is from Palestine is no longer welcome during a book fair, what is the message behind it? I cannot understand it. And Gorky Theatre cancelled a play that was acclaimed, and the director was from Israel. The actors were from Israel and Palestine. Well, isn't it very important to play this play again? So no reasonable reaction. We're not talking about stopping our thoughts, reflecting. It's this reflex, I've got to position myself, I want to be on the good side, on the same side. This won't help anyone. It won't help people living in Palestine, it won't help people living in Israel. It hardens the conflict, makes the situation worse. And it leads to a strange message. The German majority society, who maybe is not very knowledgeable about the conflict, they think Hamas sounds like a terror organization. So they did a terror attack. Mrs. Shipley is no longer welcome. And the book fair, is she a terrorist too? So this is the way people start to think. It's just two examples for many things happening at the moment. So I do share your thoughts and feelings. People didn't reflect and stop. Well, maybe it's so difficult to start to reflect because afterwards the war has started. There was no moment of pressing pause and reflect. I would have loved to pause to reflect and ponder and think what is actually going on. And a Jewish Israeli friend of mine recently sent a tweet. She said, I'd love to mourn my friends, but I don't have time because war immediately continues. There is no time for mourning. But this reaction, this performance from the German side is incredibly destructive and dangerous and gives me the feeling that people from Palestine are really accused as a collective. And our place in this society, also in cultural institutions, and they should offer a stage and open doors, these cultural institutions, our place is getting smaller and smaller. Let me just answer. Just 1 second. Bear with me for 1 second. I am very happy to see that the two of you have a dialogue. And if I don't have to say much, good, because I want you to talk to each other. One question. You talked about context and see things in relation. As of when is the suffering, or as of when is terror and suffering something that has been relativized? Because human rights are universal. And if you say that a human right is universally valid, that the law of nations has to be respected, international law has to be respected. Does that person justify terror? Well, first of all, I'd like to answer what I said and wanted to say. You, Alena, in the first case, I would agree, and in the second case, I would like to correct. Chablis, I am of your opinion. I do not understand. What did people say with Miss Shipley? Why did they not invite her for the prize ceremony, for the award ceremony? I haven't read the book yet, I must say, but I will read it. It'll be on top of my list. And if the book will be anti-Semitic, Well, the jury would have noticed before and wouldn't have taken the decision. And if the jury is of the opinion that it is a high quality literary work, there is no reason imaginable only because the author is from Palestine to not grant her award, her prize. I agree with you. Talking about Gorky Theatre, the information level is slightly different. The director of the play is from Israel, and she kindly asked, as I know, she kindly asked at this moment that please do not continue to play this drama, this play. She kindly asked Gorky Theatre, that was her wish, explicitly her wish. So please respect it. If I, as a theatre, after October 7th, are asked by a director who is from Israel, if she asks me not to continue playing this play because she is of the opinion that this is not adequate, that this is not the moment, not the right moment. It's painful. Also, as a person who works in this field. Yes, I agree. Well, it's two different topics, really. And normally, if you talk about something, there is a third topic, a third example. Tomorrow, I was invited for a digital talk. Invitation came 5, 6 months ago. Invitation by a state organization dealing with fighting anti-Muslim racism. So mandated by the state, an organization from civil society. 3 days ago, I received this email, very long email. I'm not discussing all the elaborations. Since the topic is highly sensitive, the discussion with you will be cancelled. So I was speechless. I can understand if someone says, well, maybe we ask very carefully, would you like to talk about it? Is it too fresh? Are the wounds too fresh and too raw? No. They cancelled me. They told me invitation is no longer valid. So this reflex is something, if something is sensitive, immediately they say, we are all concerned, rather do not talk about it. We don't share this reflex, but unfortunately in our society, this is something I see more and more often in our society, this wrong understanding of sensitivity. And when I think about your question, I think it's pretty obvious. I am always open to lead this discussion. And I can only repeat what I just said 10, 15 minutes ago. I clearly said so. First of all, I like to have this consensus. I like to have this recognition. So the term Be'eri Kwa Azam, Cholid, these words, these terms, everybody should know these words, these places, just like they know Srebrenica, and then we can discuss anything. I'll be the first person to discuss it. But as long as we have to fight, the Jewish people have to fight that murdered and massacred Jews, murdered and massacred as babies and toddlers whose parents were murdered. They are alone somewhere in a Hamas torture cellar, and that we have to fight so that it is recognized how bad it is. So I think for me, this world is breaking apart. Until October 7th, I thought that I was walking on secure ground. I was believing in this world which is breaking up, tearing up. I thought that I was on this, that I share the same moral values with many people, the same moral compass. And October 7th, and then I understood how alone we are. How alone we are indeed. As Thomas Dreyfus was here yesterday with me on this stage, he is an Israeli and he is a leftist Israeli. I hope that it's not a defamation. I think he defines himself as an anti-Zionist. Maybe I'm wrong, but Thomas Dreyfus was here with me on stage yesterday and he says, since October 7th, we, Israeli leftists, feel alone. not only alone in the Israeli society, in the Western society, because there is this invisible wall between leftist and non-leftist Jewish people. So this is a wall, and we have to work on it and tear it down, dismantle it. But that's not our task. That's the task of people who define themselves as leftist, as liberal, as oriented towards human rights. You have to show your opinions, and no, with a no buts or whatever.
Ich gebe Ihnen
Of course, you're right, but the way I saw it was different. I think the situation, and I could give you proof of that, I perceive the situation differently. Well, you can always convince me. It would do me good. Maybe I can sleep better at night if you can give me proof for that. My impression is that not just German politicians, but also German society has identified very strongly with the Israeli victims and hostages. I can see it again and again. Maybe I'm also moving around in a bubble, but I'm a journalist. I also look outside the bubble. What do people say? What has been published? And I do think the level of empathy is extremely strong, which does not mean, of course, that there are also completely disgusting anti-Semitic events. Synagogues are under attack, or graffiti attacks. There are pro-Palestinian demonstrations glorifying terror. But there's also this other side. And I would be pleased if you could also perceive that more, but that's also maybe a question of time. I'm sorry, this wasn't really proof. No court would accept that as evidence. Well, I can give you more evidence later on. I can mention lots of articles to you. I can show you how my colleagues have expressed themselves in the published opinion, where empathy for the victims on the Israeli side was very prominent. I'm sorry, the interpreter cannot hear this point. Mr. Mika says, there's disgusting demonstrations by pro-Palestinians cannot be justified. There's no justification for them. Yes, there's another point from the floor which the interpreter could not hear. The day before yesterday, I picked up my son from the crash, at the university crash, with my bicycle. I exited this with my bicycle. There were 3 blonde students standing in front of me and cry peace for Palestine. Well, that's just something I experienced, but it's a certain mood, and it's important for me to say it is not just in the pro-Palestinian or migrant community. There is this general groundswell of a very subtle willingness to relativize, which is present, and is based on a dehumanization of the fact that Jews live in this piece of land. That is the difference between Bucha, Srebrenica, and Be'eri. Because in Be'eri, you will say immediately, well, these are settlers. What business do they have to be there? And this is where we have to start talking about. And of course, we have a political consensus. Yes, we do have political consensus, but we don't have the social consensus about it. And we do not have the courage to fight this fight. in the cultural and arts scene, not the courage to also do it in the educational scene, because I've been talking to dozens and dozens of students, of lecturers, of teachers, of headmasters, and it's, well, on my hand, it's a small number of people where this topic was put forward actively by the teachers themselves. If there is a terror attack in France, there is a minute's silence in German schools. After September 11, there was a minute's silence. After the 7th of October, it was just business as usual. 1,300 innocent people were killed, more than 200 children, women, men, who were abducted in some kind of torture chamber. And they are there now at the moment. So 22-year-old German women who were pulled through the streets of Gaza, and they were showed nearly naked to the general public, a Hamas person sitting on top of this German, and the crowd is spitting on her and beating her up. But it's business as usual here. And of course, politicians say what they have to say, but there is no social consensus as you had it here after September 11 or after the terror attacks in France. I think you have to give me lots more of evidence to convince me that we have reached this level yet. Oh, the hour is too short, obviously, and I can't respond to many of these points, or all of these points. I was just picking up on one point because you mentioned September 11. It is difficult to have this conversation now because Germany, that's 80 million people, and everyone is moving around in different scenes and is making different experiences, and they are real and they are coexistent with each other. And of course, you perceive it the way you do, but even though it's difficult, I have to say that every day I'm getting dozens of messages from Palestinians who say, I feel completely dehumanized in this country, And they get panic, they're getting panic attacks, they are the feeling that they are being wiped out, because now there are symbols which do not represent terror. They're not related to Hamas, but they are part of the Palestinian cultural identity, and they are being criminalized. For example, the kufiya, which my great-grandfather has wearing on his head dozens of years before Hamas was founded. And I, as a German in this country, I'm really afraid when people are wearing a kufiya, the headscarf, and they are stopped by police. There were terrible pictures of protests, and of course we're in a country governed by the rule of law. There should be a legal reaction to it. But I also know hundreds of people who would like to go out to the street peacefully, and was mourning the people. I'm not sure how many they are, 4,000 people who have so far been killed in Gaza, but they were not allowed to because most of the protests were banned even before they started. They tried to sort of fashion some kind of melon in order to express watermelon in order to express their sorrow. The Brandenburg Gate was lit up in the Israeli colors, but the policemen went through Berlin with pots of paint, and they have colored over or painted over Palestinian flags. And this is also seen by people who live here and who also feel lots of empathy with the Israeli victims, but they are also part of this society. They're a big part of society, and these are our friends. And what kind of message is this? So I would wish that Germany should maybe keep a low profile. I'm not really have such a big expectation of German society. Just take a step back. This is not a football game where you have to take sides, or you tend to take sides. This is people have been killed, people are still being killed, and people are but dying. There's so much suffering caused. I don't know how these wounds can ever heal over, and it's carried on. It's not stopping. But instead of thinking about it constructively as to what we can do, how can we bring people together? How can we say this was a terrible massacre, but it can't be justified, full stop. In Gaza, there are people who for years have been living under conditions running down to the international law, and they are being discriminated, and that can't be acceptable. It has to be. These two points of view must be able to coexist. The fact that Germany will not solve the Middle East conflict, and that should take a low profile, I think that's obvious. I think it's more stones or stumbling blocks put in the way of progress. There was this attack on the synagogue, which is a rupture, which is a turning point, alarm, which we should listen to. In the U.S., a six-year Palestinian boy was stabbed by his landlord, who was so heated up by the coverage of the Hamas attack that he has killed this boy with stabbed 20 times with a knife, and I'm really getting very afraid. They're becoming very afraid. After 9/11, terrible things happened in the U.S. Innocent people were put into torture chambers, and hatred has risen so much in this society, and in Germany too. Meron, because you're also working on anti-Muslim racism, but I have friends with wearing headscarves who were spat on after 9/11 in the street in Germany, and I don't understand why everyone thinks you have to take sides. The side of a state or an ethnic group or a religion. It is a problem for us all. And why this is not understood by people, that taking sides is detrimental to everyone, especially detrimental to the people in Palestine and Israel. I don't really understand this. And if people can't understand this, then the least thing I would wish is that should take a step back and listen to people who are affected themselves directly, and accept that there are different realities which coexist side by side.
Ich kann jedes Wort, das wirklich
I can only underline what you say. Every word you say, with all of my heart, can underline that people feel criminalized if they are from Palestine or pro-Palestine. It is the wrong reaction, and very different if you think about something. If you think that you pay a service to the Jewish people or Israel, you're wrong if you criminalize anyone who is from Palestine. Also, those who praise Hamas on the street, if they think they help Palestine, they don't. Absolutely wrong. And let me remind you of the fact that the first victims of Hamas were no Jewish Israeli citizens. Hamas started 2006 to gain power. In 2007, the first person who was so Fatah people were thrown down on of the 20th floor, and then they persecuted homosexuals and then Jewish people. So this ideology doesn't mean liberation of Palestine. It is simply a fundamentalist Islamist ideology. And at the moment, you wonder why this cruelty? Because they do not want understanding. Cruelty stops this understanding and reconciliation. And if we fall into their traps, we help them. So right here, we have to be able to make a distinction between people from Palestine and supporters of Hamas. And in a second case, we have to react clearly. In the first case, not only accept it, but also see it as part of the democratic and liberal liberty and freedom in our society. So there is no contradiction. I was asking for the fact that the events of October 7th, without relativizing or contextualizing it, seeing them, perceiving them as such, respect, acknowledge them as such. So the Palestine people has the justified wish to have their own sovereign state. But this is nobody questions their wish to have a sovereign state. Thank you. Unfortunately, this 1 hour of discussion is over now. Both of you have shown very clearly that one can talk to another, that one can accept a different point of view, that there is a difference between Hamas and Palestine, that you shouldn't say they're all roll into one. It's not the same thing. And in the best case, we can mourn together, mourn the victims. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our audience.